Hello, I'm in the historic town of Battle, which is near Hastings, where the Battle of Hastings took place in 1066. But before I go into it, I'm just going to pour myself a nice cup of English tea and scones as well, as you can see here. So very, very English. And so what you're seeing behind me is the Museum of the Battle of Hastings, which took place in 1066. So why have I brought you here? Well, it's to really examine and question whether there is such a thing as a mono-European, mono-ethnic, mono-culture Europe. Now, when the battle took place in 1066, it was between William the Conqueror, who took 7,000 men and brought ships here, and defeated King Harold Godwin, Harold II, in 1066. Only 3 days before, King Harold actually defeated the Norwegian army that invaded in the north, known as the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So the armies were worn out, so obviously that took a toll, and they lost the Battle of Hastings, and then ushered in the Norman conquest after 1066, which transformed Britain. And what did the Normans do for Britain? Well, quite a bit actually. In fact, the fact that I'm speaking English with you and you're understanding me is the credit can be given to the Normans. So when they came in, they fused the Anglo-Saxon language and the Norman French language, which became English, which is why after the spread of the British Empire around the world, that's why you can understand me and I can understand you. So let me just have a sip of tea. Now, so when someone like Lana, Lokteff talks about defending Europe and being proud of Europe,
I don't even have to say it. Anti-white propaganda has laid it all out for you. We've all seen the movies. Hollywood makes it all very clear. White equals the worst thing any white person can ever be. Even I haven't particularly liked the term because it evokes something from the 1970s Aryan nation run by meth heads and plenty of federal agents. But the definition of this word keeps changing to encompass more and more white people. If you as a white person are critical of mass immigration, diversity, and becoming a minority in your country, you are a white. Now it's even gone as far as the establishment calling Trump one too. Yet most of us know he cares for Israel far more than white Americans. In fact, he mentions every group of people except for white Americans. We can be thrilled about Black, Asian, or Hispanic unemployment rates, but never, ever, ever mention white Americans as a group. It's only okay to mention them when you are shaming or blaming them as a group. What it means then is that it's dirty, immoral, and shameful for a white person to be concerned about other white people. That they are the equivalent of horrible criminals if they do care. You as a white person are not allowed to be a nationalist. You are not allowed to want your people to remain a majority because that is separatism. You are only allowed one option: multiculturalism and becoming a minority. But you must also gleefully accept ethnic and racially based nationalism and separatism for all other peoples on the planet. In fact, Trump is passing a law to make it illegal to be critical of Israeli nationalism. And the same people who support this law want to ban nationalism for white people. Understand that if you were white and you support the existence of white nations, countries where white people are the majority and have been since the start, if you support this anywhere on the planet, even little European countries like Estonia, you are promoting white But the truth is, Europe and America from the founding was a white nation. It was a self-evident truth. They didn't need to call themselves WNs. Being a majority in the nation they founded was without question. We are the only group told that we cannot exist as a majority in any space, anywhere on the face of the earth. Yes, there have always been some non-Europeans here and there in small number in some European nations. No one's fighting that. And most nationalists are okay with it in very small numbers if it doesn't upset the balance. That is the key. We're not talking about mandatory purity tests here, although Israel actually does have that. But the moment you speak out against globalist extremists who seem to think importing millions of needy foreigners endlessly to the point of making the native population a minority isn't extreme. But wait, I thought it was extreme, racist, and wrong for Europeans to have colonies in foreign lands, but nah, all that goes out the brain when non-Europeans are doing the colonizing. So colonizing in massive numbers in European countries, even small ones like Sweden, isn't extreme. But for a Swede to say, wait a minute, hold on, what is going on here? I don't like this. Everything is changing. I want Sweden to be Swedish people. Then it's alert the presses. We have an extremist and a white on the loose. This is how far gone the West is. Wanting to maintain the founding stock of a country is extremist and dangerous, but completely and utterly transforming a country with millions of people you don't know from opposing cultures, even when it's the cause of violence, that's being tolerant and the right thing to do. Yet those few Europeans scattered across Africa, they are invaders, and you won't get banned for calling Europeans invaders, rapists, and murderers. So it's wrong for them to have a country of their own because those are all now multicultural states for everyone. But then they also can't live overseas in foreign nations either. Well, where are they supposed to go exactly? Oh, don't worry, no one's replacing you. You'll still be here, just as a hated minority. And now if you as a white person are critical and see the ill effects of mass immigration, multiculturalism, and diversity, you are one step away from being labeled a WN, a terrorist and a dangerous separatist.
Well, assuming that there is one European monoculture, then you ask the inhabitants of Europe during that time in 1066, whether it's a Norman, whether it's William the Conqueror or Alfred, or other little empires that existed, did they consider themselves as one big European culture? No, they fought each other. You had the Roman invasion of Britain in, I think, 45 AD under Emperor Claudius. The Romans were seen as invaders. Do you think that Romans were seen as, yeah, our European brothers, white and a monoculture? No, they were invaders. The Normans, when they came, they were seen as invaders. The Vikings that came were seen as invaders. So they did not have this, oh, we're all one European white monoculture. So when Douglas Murray talks about the death of Europe, which Europe are you talking about? You know, that's very interesting. And whilst we're talking about the Normans, not only did they transform Britain, they also went to and governed South Italy and Sicily. At that time, Sicily was ruled by the Muslims, but when they took over, they didn't kick out the Muslims. They were still there. So you had a fusion of Muslim residents, the Orthodox Christians, and Roman Catholicism. You know, something akin to multiculturalism, maybe, what the Normans did. So oh, this is delicious here. Right, so when Muslims did actually rule Spain, Spain is European, did they actually destroy Europe? No. Yes, the Muslims were kicked out of Spain in 1492 under the Spanish Inquisition, and the Jews were kicked out as well, which is why the Muslim Empire at that time welcomed their Jewish brethren with open arms. So did they actually destroy Europe? No, as I said before, that there was a lot of cross-cultural cross-fertilization of knowledge that came into Europe that triggered the European Renaissance from the Arabs. So if you're asking, whatever did the Muslims do to Europe? Well, they enriched Europe. They triggered the European Renaissance. So on that basis, if you think, as Lana said, that because development is one criteria for the Europeans to be in America because they helped develop it, well, you know, by the same token, Muslims should have been here before. But you're not going to agree with that, are you? It's very interesting. So coming back to Douglas's point, what death, when they had the Muslims here before and the shift of knowledge, how did Europe die? It would have died at that time, but it didn't. And after Muslims were kicked out, a lot of the cultural heritage was still retained in Spain and can be seen today in Grenada. Yeah, a bit of cream. Don't advise this regularly, but it's actually quite enjoyable. So if you want to feel English, then you know this is the way to do it. Yeah. So. So coming back to what I was saying, when over 1,000 years ago, these different little countries in Europe didn't see themselves as one big pan-European entity because they fought each other. Then you know what Europe are you talking about? That needs to be defended from Muslim invasion, and the Muslims had already been in Europe before, and we see their legacy still in Europe through signs, and not just Muslims, but also the Hindus and also the Chinese that also contributed to civilization. And if, as Lana says, if white Americans are told to go back to Europe, then they will have to take back all the development they made in America to see whether the non-whites can actually replicate what the whites did. So by the same token, then given that you don't want Muslims in Europe, then we should take back the Arabic numerals, the digits that form the numbers 1 to 9. Also the Hindus have the right to take back the zero because they invented the zero, which is the kingpin of mathematics. It'd be interesting to see how you fare with Roman numerals without the existence of mathematics we understand today, calculus, etc. And yeah, so let's take all of that back, see if we can actually survive. The Chinese have the right to take back paper, don't they? If we don't want the Chinese to come to Europe to be citizens, then yeah, they have the right to take back paper. Do you think society will survive? So it's very interesting. So what Lana was actually saying, the argument actually falls down completely because different cultures have made contributions to civilizations. If they were to take everything back that they had made, society would actually regress, not progress. And also, when Lana mentioned about the lack of knowledge of people who say, "Oh, you white people, you go back to Europe," the American whites, the fact that it's not as easy because, in terms of the law and the practicality, no white Americans can automatically can become Europeans. But as Lana argues, well, it's much easier for black Africans to come to Europe than white Americans to become citizens. Well, there is a solution actually. I don't know if Lana and her team would actually agree with this. The reason why you can't come back to Britain is because America fought in the War of Independence against the British in the 18th century. Yes, the rebels, I call them rebels, but they're probably heroes in America. They defeated General Cornwallis, who led the British Army to retain British control. So if Britain was still ruling America, which it has every right to do, then it would have been easy for Americans, or especially white Americans, to come back to Britain. So don't blame the laws as they currently stand. You wanted independence, you have it. So don't complain if the laws are hard for you guys to come back. And also another point is that what are your views about black Americans? Should they do they have the right to be in America, or should they actually go back? That's a point that didn't occur to you, because if you think that they should actually go back, or if there are Muslims here in Britain who've been born in Britain should go back, where should they go back to? Because they're not citizens of their parents' countries of origin. a lot of them. So it's the same argument that applies that you have applied of why it's difficult for white Americans to come back to Europe, but you don't want to apply the same benefit of the doubt to born Muslims in Europe who don't have citizenship in their parents' country of origin. So you still want Muslims to go back. So it's very interesting. So it's a cocktail of contradictions that I'm pointing out here as I sip my tea and have my scones, and I'll finish my work here. So once again, I'd seriously advise white rights activists to really seriously think about the contradictions that are there in their thinking. And interestingly enough, when we had the referendum, the European referendum in 2016 here in the UK, I voted to remain. Why? Because I want to see a stronger Europe. So it's interesting with the white supremacists, they talk about this pan-European white right thing, so you should be supporting a strong Europe. But Brenton Tarrant supports Brexit, as I keep on saying, which actually stops other white Europeans from, which will stop other white Europeans from coming to Britain, or Britons going to Europe. So it's really bizarre. And the reason why I voted to remain is to make Europe stronger. Yes, there's that movement of manpower within Europe, but economically stronger. I want to see a stronger European bloc that will be influential around the world. That's why I voted Remain. Whereas those white nationalists, you don't want. You're saying you're white Europeans. You want a strong culture. You don't want the death of Europe, but at the same time you want Brexit. You want Britain to. You want essentially Europe to break up. So again, make your mind up. Do you want a strong Europe or not? I do. And Islam is certainly not a threat, because it already had its contribution hundreds of years ago, as I said. And I think the threat to Britain and Europe is not Islam. I would say, terrorism is an enemy to the whole of the world. That goes without saying. But I think there is a contradiction of ideologies going in parallel, which I think Europe needs to grapple with. That you have that basic Judeo-Christian identity, which seems to be seeping under the ground and being overtaken by secularism, which in its extreme forms is very intolerant of religion, in any religion. And you have sort of what I would term extreme atheists, who don't want to see religion in society or see any value of religion in society. It should be kept to the church or the mosque, the synagogues, or the mandirs. So that's where I think the real threat is. And if you ask any Christian, I've come across Christians here, staunch Christians, practicing Christians, who lament the undermining of British Christian values because of secularism.
Hands in the audience, yes sir, what would you like to say?
Thanks. I think Alan sort of has proven the point that you don't really need a new 10 Commandments, because you can adapt the existing. Now, in the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible, David Cameron actually recognised the value of Judeo-Christianity in modern Britain, and there should be more focus on that going forward. Now, from a Muslim point of view, it's quite refreshing. I actually agree with that. Refreshing to see a politician actually use religion in a positive context. Now, whilst we may not need a new 10 Commandments, I agree with the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, whose words are actually quoted in the book Triple Jeopardy by Bishop Michael Nazir Ali, who says that Jews and Christians should work together to reclaim the soul of Europe through biblical teachings. Now, I'd go further and say, hang on guys, work with the Muslim community and the Sikhs and Buddhists, because there are a lot of social problems that we can address.
Okay. Also work with non-believers. And this has been the problem of Richard Dawkins, that he's been so busy attacking what he sees as superstition of religion, which I agree with it to a large part, but he's not focused on what atheists also need. Although I would add to your category, non-believers. Non-believers deserve to be part of an ethical project as much as anyone else.
Gentlemen here, yeah, go on.
Yeah, 2 points. Firstly, as a Muslim couple, we did have consultations with committed Christian doctors and nurses. We've had conversations about God, and they encourage more faith in God. And as a Muslim couple, we actually appreciated the advice. It's not bad medical practice, because unlike what the GMC or the British Humanist Association say, because they fail to realise that psychology is a part of the healing process. And my second point is that even though I am British and I've been in a Christian boarding school, I can see things as an outsider because I am a Muslim Bangladeshi, and what I see is a slow vaporization of Jewish Christian values from our society, where Christians feel isolated. And even as a Muslim, I feel very, very sad.
That's extremely helpful, actually. That's your bigger platform, isn't it?
And I've got the Margate Muslims behind me supporting me. I've got a Muslim doctor.
Yeah, and I support my Christian brothers and sisters who want to see Christianity practiced in Britain, which it was before. So the threat is actually not from Islam, given that Islam, Judaism, Christianity came from the same part of the Middle East, and they're all foreign religions in that sense. But the real enemy, I think, is secularism, which seeks to destroy the influence of religion within society. So again, you have the white supremacists have to wrestle with this. I'd say there's an identity crisis. Are you Christian? And that's where Brenton Tarrant's confusion actually lies. He himself is having an identity crisis there. So as I said, I hope you've enjoyed this little information sharing in the town itself, the Battle of Hastings, where people at that time didn't really see themselves as one European entity. The way forward, I think, is common understanding, mutual tolerance, and we are living in the world of globalization now. The following clip you're going to see or listen to is actually produced by a YouTuber called Earthling Carl. I would describe him as a white rights nationalist or advocate. I will not use the term white supremacy because that brings up barriers and you can't really progress to have a conversation. Now, I've been tracking him over the last year or so. He does respond to the presenters from LBC Radio, and his main fire, I think, is against Majid Nawaz, with whom I've been having conversations with on radio over the last couple of years. Now, so the clip you're going to see is actually a recording of my conversation with Majid Nawaz just one day after the New Zealand attacks, and then he actually starts to respond to this conversation, or he tries to rebut the conversation. So you're going to listen to that now, and the captions you're going to see are actually his captions, because that's his video I'm playing you now, and then afterwards I will actually respond to Earthling Carl. So have a look.
And secondly, and here's the laughable point, we answered the question, by living in New Zealand, weren't you an immigrant yourself? So he answered by saying, an Australian living in New Zealand is much the same as an Austrian living in Bavaria. They aren't going to ethnically replace the people or change the nation's culture. Yeah, right. Tell that to the Maoris and the Aborigines, who are the natives of Australia and New Zealand. So
it's laughable. It's laughable. I mean, often these people are blind to their own contradictions and hypocrisies in that way. But thank you, Hassan, for calling in there from Slough. Beth wants...
This self-hating white man here, his logic, if you can call it that, seems to be that white people should hand over our society to third world Muslims and Africans because the same white people conquered other third world people centuries ago. It's completely insane. And to be clear, what's important is that all of humanity has been conquering each other since the beginning of humanity. That's what humans do. And in this case, sadly, the Aborigines, the Maori, they had inferior technology, weapons, organisational ability. They could not form armies. They could not pose any defence. You know, when the white man set foot on these islands, it would be as if aliens landed a spaceship in London. That's how big the difference is. They were literally the definition of the third world. They were, and by the way, please see Stefan Molyneux, his video on these people. They weren't noble savages. They were cannibalising each other, doing all sorts of crazy voodoo shit. They were not good. And so, yeah, we civilised them. I believe if you are taking part in cannibalism, you are a savage. So yes, we civilised the savages. But now we have to just hand over what we've built, the civilization that exists in New Zealand and Australia and the entire Western world, to Muslims and Africans because McGilt. Oh, McGilt, McColonialism. Fuck off.
honestly. So I'll respond to Earthling Carl now. So although this is not a live conversation we're having, it's a response to his rebuttal of my conversation with Majid Nawaz. So I'll engage now. It'll be the second time I'm engaging with the white rights nationalist. The first time, you may recall, was in 2009 when I visited the BBC Question Time programme, and Nick Griffin, the ex-leader of the BNP, was on it, so I asked him a question. So that was a direct first-time engagement I had with him. I think Bonnie Tyler, who was sitting next to him, was very naughty. She actually took over the conversation, although I really wanted to listen to what Nick Griffin had to say, or what answer he had for my question that I posed to him.
Everybody, we can all lay our stories out and talk about.
So maybe through this video, if we do have a conversation with white rights activists, then maybe they could answer the question that I posed to Nick Griffin. So that was the first engagement. This response to Earthling Carl will be my second engagement with the white rights narrative.
Mr. Worf, dispatch a subspace message. We have engaged the Borg.
Oh my word, what can I say? It was a very, very humorous response, and a poor excuse for an argumentation and a rebuttal of my conversation with Majid Nawaz. First and foremost, he thought I was a white man. I don't know how the hell he thought that. Of course, it was a radio conversation, so he couldn't see me. But it may be because Majid pronounced my name as Hassan, which sounds very, very English, so he probably thought I was an Englishman or a white man who hates himself. So he used the term ethno-masochist in his video. You'll see in the caption. So ethno-masochist is someone who hates their own race. So apparently I'm a white man who hates being white. I'm brown, last time I checked, and proud to be brown. As I say, I go beyond all this racial division nonsense. But let's really get, no harm done, that's fine. Let's get to the meat of what he actually said in his rebuttal. So he's actually answering a point that I actually never made. So he goes on to say that, these colonialists, Europeans, are asked to give back to these third world Muslims and Africans these territories because of colonialism, colonial guilt, etc. No, I never made that point. Nothing to do with colonialism. And if you review the video, the conversation again and again and again, you will never be able to make that interpretation that he, Earthling Carl, had made. So my response, my conversation really was in response to the claim made by Brenton Tarrant, where he was responding to a very valid criticism he had received as to why he himself is an immigrant to New Zealand from Australia. So doesn't he see that as a problem? Aren't you an immigrant? To that he replied, well, not really, because the culture of the Australian and the New Zealanders are very similar. So he's not changing the culture in the new country. And so he brought the analogy of an Austrian going to Bavaria. They're not going to change the culture of Bavaria. So so my counter argument was, well, actually that is a contradiction, because by the very fact that Europeans went to Australia initially, changed the local culture of the Aborigines and the Maoris in New Zealand. So there was a very stark contradiction I was explaining, I was trying to highlight, that Brenton Tarrant made, but for some reason Earthling Carl took a completely different understanding, and I think it's really an eye-opening to the mindset of a white nationalist. And this is not meant to be a character in assassination. I don't do ad hominems, but it's the same mindset as Muslim extremists I've come across, and terrorist sympathizers who are devoid of their critical thinking. Yeah, so he answered the point I never made, but he does actually say that Australians were savages, the Aborigines. They were cannibals, so the white Europeans went to civilize them, so that's the justification. Okay. So in response to that, I just draw your attention to Creation Ministries International, which is a Christian ministry based in Australia, and the name that's given here is Dr. Carl Wieland. And I think, just judging by the name, Creation Ministries, they probably believe in the young earth creationism, which a lot of Christians do believe, but that's a debate for another time. But he says in response to someone who emailed him about the Aborigines and cannibalism, because Carl was saying, oh, these Aborigines were cannibals and savages. First, there is some controversy raging over whether the sporadic reports of Aboriginal cannibalism are real or white colonist myth. On balance, it seems likely that there was some degree of cannibalism practiced, though an extremely minor and certainly not common feature of their known history. Okay, so cannibalism is not a feature of their history, and then Dr. Whelan actually goes on to mention about the human rights abuses that are taking place in other parts of the world. For example, Nazi Germany. Nazis, they regarded themselves as white Aryan race, and they prided themselves in that, and the torture they inflicted on the Jews, 6 million Jews and millions of other people, the gypsies, etc., disabled. That was human savagery in what we termed as the modern world in the 20th century. And there are, let's not forget, communism. Because of communism, millions of people actually died, and communists were Soviets. Russians are related to the Europeans, if not Europeans, and they're Slavic people, same race. So to isolate the Aborigines for their apparent savagery and isolated cases of cannibalism is actually very, very unfair. And there are human rights abuses taking place today in the so-called modern world in 2019, in the West and the East and the North and the South, by all races. And this sort of abuse will put, or should put, the United Nations and Amnesty International to shame. But I won't mention what the human rights abuses are here. It's not the time and the place. But I just want to point out that this is a universal phenomena. So to justify colonialism because you're trying to civilize these savages is actually a very, very weak argument. And also, if I just refer to Africa, when the European explorers went to Africa in the 18th century, they wrote many novels about the journeys, and they called Africa a dark continent because they thought they were steeped in savagery. Again, a bit of cannibalism was also mentioned, and it's a continent that needed civilization, the enlightenment of white Christian civilization to Africa, which is very interesting. Now, I've mentioned about China and India on their route to becoming a superpower. I didn't mention Africa, and let me just ask you this question. How much do you know about the contribution Africans have made to civilization? Try and think of one or two examples. If you can't, then I think it just goes to show how much of a dumbing down there's been in terms of trying to correct the understanding of black history. Now, in the 14th and 15th century, there was the Songhai Empire, which is in the Western Sahara, so Western Africa, which was ruled by, at the time, they were under the influence of Islam. And it was a centre for trading, and people from other parts of the world actually came to trade. And also the University of Timbuktu was actually established, where there were scholars from all over the world that came to study, and even manuscripts exist today which record writings on philosophy, on astronomy, medicine, mathematics. So they were pretty advanced, and Spain was actually conquered by North African Muslims, and they ruled Spain, and it was an advanced civilization in Europe at that time. Now, going further back in the pre-Islamic era, the very first evidence of the use of surgical instruments, is actually from Africa, from Egypt, in 3,500 BC, or sorry, 2,500 BC. Now, if we were to use Lana's argument that, oh, if the whites from America have to go back to Europe, then they should take back all the development they made and see if the non-whites can actually replicate and survive. Well, likewise, if Africans have to go back to Africa, let them take back surgery. Let's see if civilization can survive today without surgery. Okay, so surgery, and also the development of a state. So this is in the Nubian state, again around about the same time, right, 3000 BC or so. The state called Tar-Seti. That was the very first political state of its time. The idea of statehood came thousands of years later, I think in the 17th century. But they were pretty advanced to establish a state, a political entity, thousands of years ago. And not to mention the building of the pyramids. Now, this is really funny here. The black civilization in Egypt at that time, they had the technology and the know-how to build the pyramids, something that really baffled archaeologists, including European archaeologists. I think it was only recently, in the last 2 years or so, archaeologists were able to decipher how the pyramids were actually made. But prior to that, they just couldn't work out how black people could do it. So there were some conspiracy theories that aliens must have come down and used their technology to build the pyramids, because they can't, it doesn't go into their heads that black people had the know-how and the technology at that time. And that meant not just the technology that's based on certain engineering principles and mathematics, so good harnessing of these tools during that time. And it's just amazing how later on Europeans had concluded that they were a bunch of savages. It's mind-boggling. And on 2 occasions I actually heard that the reason why Africa didn't develop so much is because the weather was really nice and sunny, and people didn't have to battle the raging storms that Europeans had to, which meant that they had to be forced to develop technologies to protect themselves from the weather, which developed into further modernizations, etc. Absolute poppycock, really. The Africans did not depend on the weather to build the pyramids. They had the technology and the know-how, and it's absolutely asinine how even there's residual bias against the development of the African race. So Earthling Carl, coming back to him, I don't know whether he would consider Africans to have been savages who were civilized by Christian Europe. But there we are. So I've linked up the African and the Aborigines, and it's just as well I mentioned Africa, because in the previous 3 hours I did not mention Africa. I mentioned India and China that are going to be superpowers, but one day I'm hoping that Africa will be a superpower up there, God willing. Now, Carl also mentioned about spaceship, justifying the Europeans going into changing the culture of the Aborigines. It's equivalent to a spaceship coming down, and with their advanced technology and know-how, then they're going to take over our territory. So I don't know if Carl actually agrees with that. If there was a spaceship or an advanced alien civilization that came to Earth, would he actually invite them with open arms because they're a more advanced technology? He would, but I can tell you, the rest of us, we will fight to defend ourselves.
Hold on.
And finally, the name itself, Earthling, Carl, Earthling. What is an Earthling? An Earthling is someone who belongs to Earth, is a citizen of Earth, Earthling, as opposed to a Martian. So, citizen of Earth. We belong to Earth, planet Earth, globalization, and I'm glad that Earthling name is there. So just keep that name, because that is a very global concept of how we should see ourselves. So what our position is, that we are citizens of Earth. Let's have that global outlook, respecting each other but condemning terrorism wherever it rears its ugly head, or whether it's the Rotherham rape gangs or murder. We're all in this together, and this really is a call for unity and dialogue with those who disagree. And I hope that at least the TARRANT'S supporters who are thinking of machine gunning other Muslims will actually stop from doing so. And likewise, I hadn't made a video against Muslim terrorism because I had wanted to debate, have a live debate with which was going to take place in 2005. And I hope if there's a message for the Muslim terrorists who are being inspired by what you're seeing online, by these Al-Qaeda, ISIS groups, then know this, that they are against Islam. They are the avowed enemies of Islam. The Prophet warned against these people. It's your duty as Muslims to fight against these people. So with that in mind, please review the video, and if you have any questions, well, I hope I can engage in dialogue with the non-violent white supremacists who are advocating white rights, and I hope we can move forward in our convergence towards oneness and brotherhood. Thank you very much.